So, hi everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Zoe Razbash, and I'm a researcher and producer working at the intersection of climate justice and culture. And thank you for joining us today for this BFI Fan Green Hour session. The Green Hour is an online learning series for film exhibitors focusing on environmental sustainability. And this is a nationwide program open to all members of the regional and national film hubs. As mentioned before, and as you can see in the chat, please note that closed captions are available throughout the session. So if you need to use them, you can click on the CC button in the lower right corner of the screen. This webinar is recorded and will be made available later on the BFI Fan YouTube channel if you need to refer back to anything or if you have to leave early for whatever reason. So now that all of the admin is out of the way, I'm really excited that we're going to be talking about retrofit fundraising for community cinemas. It's a niche green hour this time, but I think it's really important. We want to talk about how we build sustainable futures and fundraise for well-loved community spaces. This can be really difficult. We know that retrofit can be really confusing. It can be really overwhelming. It can be really cost and resource intensive, capacity intensive. So we've got two great speakers here today to kind of talk us through how we can think about funding strategy, application best practices, and how to frame this work to get funded. So today we're going to be joined by Katie Clark, who is a funding manager in the National Lottery Awards for All England team, managing the environmental funding stream. She's worked at the fund since 2017 and in the awards for all teams since 2018. Marcella works at Hackney Council in London, leading their community energy and fuel poverty services through the Hackney Community Energy Fund. They help non-for-profit organisations such as cinemas, theatres and music venues identify and apply for funding to improve the energy efficiency of their buildings and reduce the energy bills. So we've got two great speakers here today to talk about kind of different perspectives. And so there'll be plenty of time for Q&A after the presentations, but we're going to start things off by just hearing a little bit from each speaker. So Katie, I'm going to hand over to you to start. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Zoe. I'm just going to stick some slides up on the screen. Yes, here we go. Go from the beginning because that's a good place to start. So thank you guys for having me. Like Zoe said, my name is Katie Clark and I work on the National Lottery Awards for All England team, specifically managing the environment funding stream. And so I'm going to kind of chat you through what that program is all about, and then more than happy to take any questions about how your work might fit into the kind of things that we're looking to fund. So context for launching this funding stream, which we did in June of this year, was kind of all around the fund's mission, one of 4 community-led missions focusing on the environment and being concerned about climate change and loss of nature, but local action being able to make a difference in those areas. So we launched this program to do 2 things predominantly. So to either help people connect with and care for nature in their area, or to make a positive difference to the environment. And lots of the projects that we're funding will obviously hit both. In this scenario, it seems like the making the positive difference to the environment is the bit that would be the best kind of fit for these kinds of projects. But those are our dual aims. So these are grants from £300 up to £20,000 for up to 2 years. So it doesn't have to be 2 years. You are eligible to receive National Lottery Awards for All funding every 12 months for up to £20,000, but you can also run those projects over 2 years if you want to. And it's just a one-stage application process, and you can apply at any time from our webpage, which you can easily find online if you search for it. So who can apply? We kind of have a great list of things. So this is all stuff that is available on the website, so I won't spend ages on it, but it's kind of the important bit is around having 2 directors who aren't related, and kind of fitting into that charity, not-for-profit, voluntary kind of sector. We can't accept applications from groups that already have an Awards for All, standard Awards for All grant, even if it's not on the environment side of stuff, or if you have had that funding from us elsewhere. We can't accept applications from individuals or sole traders, organisations based outside the UK, or for-profit companies. Right, more interesting bit. So what can you spend the money on? You can spend the money on a whole host of things. I think in this situation, you kind of that last bullet point is the most relevant. So small land or refurbishment projects. There are some kind of requirements around ownership of buildings and things like that. But I'd imagine that in your situations that those would all be fairly clear cut. But you could apply for that alongside other funds to run a project, run community engagement work, pay for core costs, that kind of thing. So just kind of digging down a little bit on those aims that I mentioned at the beginning. Under our first aim of wanting to help people connect with and care for nature in their area, that could look like making a positive difference to local green spaces or helping connect local people to nature. So the kind of stuff that we've been funding in that area has been a lot of community gardens, a lot of kind of well-being and kind of like community-based work in green spaces, rewilding, biodiversity work, all of that kind of stuff, which is maybe less relevant to what these projects would be looking to do, but could still be connected, could have an element of that going on for sure. But under our making a positive difference to the environment stream, we are looking to fund things that deliver sustainable activities and help people reduce carbon or save energy. So funding things like solar panels, water pumps, alternative kind of waste and recycling management projects, things like that. So the application form is really quite straightforward and simple. So it's just 3 questions, and they've each got kind of slightly different word limits, but none of them are very extensive. So what would you like to do? How does your project meet our funding priorities? So that's one of the 2 aims. And how does your project involve your community? They're all kind of equally as important as each other questions. But there could be some overlap, I guess, in there as well. And then that's just provided alongside all the standard information that you would expect to apply using a funding application around your organisation information and bank statements and things like that. So I wanted to stick a slide in on the community involvement stuff, just because on this environment programme, we have found that has been one of the most challenging parts, I think, for organisations to kind of demonstrate, is how local people are involved in these kinds of projects, because they can quite often present as fairly top down, whereas we know that kind of environmental work in its own right is a really positive and a great thing to do, but we do want to see that that it's a kind of a project that's been supported by the community and is also taking people on a journey. So say, for example, with a village hall that's putting solar panels on the roof, what is that space a well-used community space? Do they run their toddler group, bingo group, free community engagement activities? Have they consulted the community? Did they do a survey? All of those kinds of questions, and that kind of thing feels like it could map onto these kinds of projects if there was the opportunity in around kind of your localities to do so. But yeah, we're really with the community fund, so we're looking for the community to be involved and to have had input into program design, how spaces are going to be used, that kind of thing. So I've had a little look at kind of what we funded so far, and we don't have any cinemas per se that we have funded already through this, but again, like I said, I can imagine that there could be projects that could map onto this. So we funded a sports club in Leeds that wanted 20k for their solar panels. So they are a sports club, but that is a also a space that's being used by the wider community. They run regular seasonal events, other community activities. It's an area of really high economic disadvantage, and they were able to kind of really strongly have that community involvement come through in their application. Also funded a reading room in Cumbria, and this was 20k full roof insulation and solar panels. And again, just a well-used, well-loved community space that hosts those regular music groups for young people, community exercise classes, and social groups. So that is just a couple of examples for you there. I can do you want to save questions to the end? Is that the preferred? Appreciate I just rattled through that. But really happy to take any questions in the chat or later on.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was really, really great. And I think take note, guys. No cinema's been funded in this stream yet. Novelty is on your side. So apply now. And I think that's it. This is kind of a space for us to kind of really demystify this fund and how they can apply to the work that's already happening within community cinemas, and like that being really the edge that community cinemas have is connections with local groups and the programming and the space. And so, yeah, to really think about that as a strength in these applications. Just want to remind everyone to throw any questions or comments into the Q&A function. You can do that throughout when our speakers are speaking so that we can build them up. It's just down at the bottom on the Zoom bar. It's the question mark in the square box. As this is a call with less people on, like this is a great time to ask super niche detailed questions and get our speakers' thoughts on it, because you won't be taking up too much space. So like I would say, like, really go crazy with the questions if you have a problem that you're thinking about. These are two really great people to get perspectives on this kind of fundraising. And so yeah, with that, Marcella, if you're happy, I'll pass over to you.
Okay, just I shortened the screen, so I need to find where to share the screen because I like seeing people when I'm presenting. So 1 second. Thank you very much, and thank you for the brilliant presentation earlier, because I will be recommending your fund to our funding organizations as well, which in this round actually includes a cinema. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Oops. Yeah, so I'll try to be very brief, but very quickly, thank you so much, Zoe, for inviting me to participate. I wasn't sure that I would be the best qualified people to be here, so I hope I have some insights that are useful. So I work for Hackney Council, a council in London, and we run a fund that supports nonprofit organizations to improve energy efficiency of their projects. So I'll share a little bit the learnings we've had from working with some arts organizations. We haven't funded a cinema yet, but we've funded a number of landmark arts centers in Hackney that do similar thing of a lot of engagement and events. So hopefully there'll be some useful things there. I think I'll start just with very brief. So this fund funds nonprofit organizations. You might have similar funds running from your local authorities. These are becoming more popular up and down the country. So it's worth checking out if there is a community energy fund there. Our fund, we encourage the organization, say the cinema, to partner with a community energy group, who is a nonprofit specialist organization that can help you take your project through from beginning to kind of funding streams and everything else, support you applying for funds and stuff. So we're a big advocate, and I'll talk a little bit more about the value that they have added. We've supported 46 projects, 39 organizations so far, including 8 arts organizations. And we are doing round 4 now that just closed applications recently. So some of the key learnings from working with these arts organizations, I think, is a journey. You know, it's important to start somewhere, but just be aware you don't have to do everything now. It could take years, it could take months. I think a lot of the arts organizations in Hackney, at least, are in very old, landmark kind of listed buildings. And we've learned that for them, the heritage of the building and the heritage features are very important. A lot of the buildings are listed. So there are considerations that need to be taken there. You need to have good partners. I think it's very hard for a cinema to have the people in their staffing that would have the knowledge and the time, perhaps, to take these projects on by themselves. So just be aware that there is a lot of support out there for you. There are specialist contractors that look at lighting on this kind of buildings, and we see in some of the applications that come through to us that there is some consistency. The different organizations using similar contractors, and they seem to all be specialists. And being a charity or a charitable organization opens up funding opportunities for you. So it's something that if you're not yet, you might look at setting up as a charitable foundation somehow, because you can still apply for some of the business grants because you are a trading organization, but there's a lot of opportunities that you wouldn't be able to do if you weren't a charitable organization. And I think Katie was talking a little bit about, engagement. Part of our project as well is engagement. And I think is a huge positive organization opportunity for you to be engaging your stakeholders on something that's very positive, that is not just about the sustainability of environment, but potentially about the sustainability of you as an organization, as you future-proof in a way. So that's a little bit what I'll say is, why would you think about retrofitting? So there is the environmental perspective. There is a net zero target for the UK that you will have to try and be involved and meet these targets over time. And you will save carbon if you reduce your energy consumption in your building. But you will also save potentially a lot of funding, a lot of money. Most organizations are spending absurd amounts in energy at the moment. So there is a real opportunity there to have savings in your budgets if you are actually taking this. And the payback time is getting lower and lower. And as I said, I think in London, at least, there's a lot of threats of some of these buildings being taken back because of lease. So we've seen that sometimes when the organization has said to the leaseholder, we will improve the building, they have had favorable lease negotiations to maintain the buildings. At least this has happened here. So I'll just give a couple of examples of organizations we have worked with here and what it has looked like, their project. So we funded Shoreditch Town Hall, is a very large listed building. They see about 1,200 people a year in their space. They organize film screenings, music events, theater, stand-up, all sorts of things. They worked with a community group called HEAL, Home Energy Action Lab. They work nationally, but they are based locally. And they have like an architecture engineering perspective of retrofit, where they're looking at the building and the structure of the building. There's different models when you are trying to find someone to do an energy audit of your building. So this model, they looked at all the different features of the building, what needs to be maintained in terms of heritage, but what is the situation with this heating? This picture on the top right is like they're looking at the zoning of how this space is used in different rooms and how it's heated in different rooms and what is the electricity supply in different rooms, to try and understand, are there opportunities to have actually more control in specific spaces? A lot of these buildings have to be considering ventilation. I think there is this thought maybe that you just insulate everything, but a lot of buildings are already suffering with overheating. That's what we've seen in some of these buildings here, that one side of the building is very cold, another one is very hot. So they'll be looking at this, doing assessments of where are these points of, that needs to be ventilated, and how is the building heated now, what are the systems that are in place. Another thing that they looked at this is they'll be looking at the energy consumption. How much does it cost? How much carbon does it produce? And then you can start looking at what are the opportunities if you switched some of these systems in your building. And I think is a key thing is to look at your bills, because, if you don't use a lot of electricity, maybe it doesn't make sense for you to think about solar panels. And then normally these retrofit assessments, they will come out with a plan at the end. So whatever you do, if you commission someone to do an assessment of your building, and they might be looking at the structure of the building, or they might just be looking at the systems, because you might be interested in specific things, like our boilers are going to die soon, so we need to look at that. You want something that gives you an action plan. And the groups we work with, we've worked with them to make sure that there is always quick things that you can do that will have an impact that don't cost money. So you want to be looking at that. But it is a phased approach. This is a three phases approach. It will probably take them years to be able to do everything, but it's about starting somewhere and starting with some knowledge. With a an assessment like this, you're much better empowered to go and apply for funding. Normally, the fundings want to know, have you done research to say that this measure is possible in your building? And the other graph here is just looking at, depending on the technology you change, you will have different impacts in terms of finance and in terms of carbon. So it's really considering what is the priority for you as an organization right now. So there isn't a strict retrofit should happen this way or in this kind of process of steps. It needs to make sense for you as an organization. So this graph here, if you can see well, is saying that heat pumps will save the most. Gas, they use a lot of gas in this building. Gas is the most carbon because electricity is being decarbonized in the grid more and more. So gas is the biggest carbon kind of draw. But to be able to put heat pumps, you need to insulate the building first, because otherwise you are not going to be able to heat this building in an appropriate way. So it's really looking at kind of the balances of priorities for you. And is this like, so the message for me is just this: you need to think about how you get to understand a little bit more your building, to understand your priorities. And then another organization we're working with is Hackney Empire, is a theater, again, another listed building in our borough. And they've been on this journey for a number of years. So initially they changed the lighting on the stage to LED lights. The council supported them, but it wasn't through our scheme. But they reported that they saved 90% of the electricity used for lighting on the stage by switching the light system to LED lights. We funded them with a grant for solar panels. And with the solar panels, they are saving 15% of the energy demand on the building, about £6,000 a year when they first installed it in 2023. Now, possibly more because energy is more expensive. And now, 2 years later, since we gave them the solar panel funding, they are working to try and secure funding for a building management system, which basically brings everything together, all the different technologies, and gives them better granular control of the different spaces within their building, so they can kind of very easily control when is their heating set off on this space and on the other space. And again, these things can save a lot of money, because a lot of these older buildings, you don't have a lot of controls. So you're spending a lot of money and a lot of energy is just going through your roof, literally, and your windows and your walls. So I didn't talk a lot, but I had the logos there. And Stokey Energy, Crew Energy, and previously Hill, they are these community energy groups that are supporting organizations in Hackney to run this project. And basically, they will do initial visits, they will help you secure or apply for funding, a lot of funding, different funding streams, I mean. And they have the expertise to manage contractors, the tendering processes. And they're a lot cheaper than if you were using a corporate organization that is for profit, because they are not for profit. So one of the recommendations is Community Energy England is a think tank that kind of brings together community energy groups across the UK. I recommend you have a look to see if there is any community energy group in your local area, because often they are looking for buildings to start projects, because often they might try to approach the local authority is not willing to work with them. So if you have controls over your building, you might be able to get a lot of support to be able to start your project. And they run a page on what are the latest funding opportunities across the country. The Arts Council has funding for capital projects and is for energy, but also for accessibility. So a number of the organizations that we've supported, they also got funding from the Arts Council as match funding, and then they use both fundings to match fund each other. Community energy groups run this thing called a share offer, where it's kind of crowdfunding. You're borrowing the money and you pay a low interest rate. There is another avenue if you are not thinking that you would have capacity to run a fundraising campaign yourself. And then finally, our fund is funded by the Carbon Offset Fund. Carbon Offset Fund is sort of a fine that developers pay when they are not meeting climate standards when they're building. And The Guardian ran an article in London saying the majority of councils are not using this funding for anything. And I could assume that this is the case up and down the country with a lot of local authorities. So it's really worth checking with your local authority if they have a way of you applying for some of their carbon offset funding, because different local authorities might enable you to apply directly for funding to deliver projects, because it's all about projects that deliver carbon savings, which most energy projects will do. So that's it from me. I'm sorry if I overrun a little bit. But yeah, I hope it was useful. Thank you.
No, it was super useful. Thank you so much, Marcella. Yes, so there's been some questions, so please keep adding your questions in the Q&A function. And if Katie, can you guys hear me? Willing to join us? Again, we're just going to go for a Q&A. I'm just going to read out some of the questions.
I don't know how I stop sharing the screen. Sorry.
You've done it. Don't worry. It's all good. We're all back in the room. Good. Yeah, all good. I'm just going to read out some of the questions that we've had so far in the Q&A function for the recording on YouTube afterwards. So Tatenda asked, would something like switching from a bulb projector to a laser projector to save energy qualify? And Katie replied, is that likely to cost the full 20k budget? To which Tatenda replied, yes, it's something that will probably need to be match funded. And Katie responded, this one would be less likely to be funded through A for A, given that you'd have to demonstrate a really, really strong community engagement where the equipment being paid for was a key part of continued community involvement. And I think that's something that you've mentioned before, Katie, is like it won't get funded unless it's really clear that there's a strong community element to it. I mean, is there anything that you'd like to add to that response, or do you feel like that kind of clears it up?
I think that there's I don't know where this sits kind of in the wider funding kind of picture or landscape. I think very specific very specific cinema equipment might struggle more than something like solar panels, where that kind of the drive around community engagement and people's kind of understanding and buy-in on the project is a little bit more straightforward to demonstrate and see, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't think I'd have a huge amount more to say about that one.
Marcella, do you have anything that you would add from your perspective? Is it something that Hackney Community Energy Fund might be able to fund, or funders like it?
For sure, and engagement is also a big part of our project. Every project has to do a community engagement piece as part of the renewable energy piece, because I think we see it as an opportunity to engage a lot of people, and is much more likely to engage with wider conversation around climate if they've seen this coming from a space where they trust, where they're happy to be visiting. So I'd say cinemas are well placed to try and make this creative. I can see how could you engage young people in this, or, people who use your cinema, that they have an opportunity perhaps of using these systems that they didn't before because it wasn't accessible or safe. So I think I have a community engagement background. I think there's always a way of trying to think about how do you make it in a way that is meaningful and engaging, and actually having a consultation where if you've done some assessment and there's different options for your building, and you are making this decision that you want to do this specific measure instead of something else, is demonstrating you've engaged your community to say, this is the most important thing for us right now, and our community kind of feels strongly about it as well. So I think there's ways of trying to demonstrate, but I think, it's being creative, and I think being open to what people have to offer, because I think it's quite incredible when you start having these conversations. People have a lot of knowledge and a lot of interest, and it has an opportunity to influence on what they do in their homes. They might start thinking about this in their homes, in their schools. So I think, it's important. I think most projects are looking at this engagement as part of the projects. It can't just be purely about carbon, because there is a net zero policy that we all need to be doing something about the environment. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to start thinking about that if they don't have an opportunity.
Yeah, I think, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's really like smaller venues, community-based venues can apply for these kinds of funds, which larger venues or chain cinemas can't. But also, like, demonstrating like a deep level of community work is not always super easy, especially when we're talking about this kind of like very specific technologies to cinemas. And I think it's kind of interesting what you were saying there, Marcella, like, is there a conversation here in terms of community engagement around like the future of film, the technologies that enable the future of film, like with young filmmakers, like an education piece? Like, I don't know, because I'm just spitballing here and this isn't my area of expertise, but I wonder if that's something that would level up the application or something to think about. Okay. Claire asks, oh,
yeah,
yes,
sorry.
please.
One of our applicants actually, their engagement piece is that young people are going to produce a film about why this is important, and the cinema is going to screen that. So, there is different things that you can think about. I think, yeah, different ways of bringing up this conversation. I don't know the national lottery that I think, is about doing something that's relevant for your community. It shouldn't be engagement that's completely relevant or different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. I think it's sometimes clear when something's like chucked on the end, but these things have to be quite integrated throughout the proposal and make sense. Sorry, there's questions coming in from all angles. Okay, so yeah, Claire asked, could you fund a refurb on solar panels for a community cinema, which is based in a building leased from a local authority? Katie responded, if you need funding for land or building work, one of the following must apply. You must own the land or building. You must have at least 5 years. You must have a letter from the owner confirming confirming the lease for at least 5 years. Your permission from the owner or landlord to do the work. You may also need to check if planning permission is required. Is there anything that you need to expand on that, Katie? I think that's quite clear. Okay, cool. And Joe Kelly asks, what are the timescales to apply, decide, and draw down the funding? Katie responds, for A4A environment, it's open rolling program with a 12 to 13 week turnaround. At the moment, funds can be used as soon as they're paid, which would happen several weeks after a very successful notification. Marcella, do you want to just let's talk a little bit about the timescales for Hackney Community Energy Fund and what other kind of similar funding schemes might be working to?
Yeah, I think it's about 2 months, 2.5 months, maybe from the point you apply to a decision being made. I think similar funds, application processes for community energy fund is maybe a little bit more complex than the one that Katie mentioned. But I think it depends on case to case. Normally, project will have to be delivered within a year. I think for most schemes we see, at least in London local authorities, is within the year. So you have to be flexible when you start your project, I think, and then considering, the winter when it's appropriate to do certain things when you have less movement. But yeah, I think it depends from fund to fund.
Just got a quick bit of feedback from Claire about our previous discussion saying you could argue that investing in equipment like laser projectors, which help community cinemas to save energy and money, means that they can keep going and serving their communities. So there is a clear community benefit. But I guess this isn't enough without community engagement. Bracket, sorry, this isn't a comment, but I couldn't add to the chat. No, thank you, Claire. That's a really, really good point. That could definitely be thread throughout the application. We've got a few more questions. So Marcella, would you be able to share the presentation? I would like to see the phases if possible for inspiration. Would that be okay, Marcella, to share afterwards?
Yeah, I just need to check with the people who run the building because they were on leave today. So if they're happy with that's been shared, yeah, for sure.
Okay, great. And do you have any tips on how to get your landlord on board for some of this work? We are not in charge of our building and try to make the case for some of those changes. We would be applying for funding, so it would not even be on the landlord to pay or barely. Any thoughts on that question? Okay.
I think in our case is as I suggested, I think we have seen in some cases it helped them renewing the lease at a better kind of condition because they committed to improving the building. I think our fund, we only allow projects when the landlord is also non-profit. Because we don't want to risk that you as a non-profit organization goes and puts a lot of effort and the next thing you know they kick you out because they can get more money for their building because now it's a better building. So I think Claire mentioned Katie mentioned 5 years. Ours says a long lease, but if you're applying for a measure that will be there for 25 years like solar panels, we want to see a longer lease than 5 years because we want to make sure again that then it's not a for-profit organization that's going to benefit in the long term. But I think it's really been clear that landlords have a commitment to improving buildings. This is happening now for residential buildings. It will happen for commercial buildings if it's not happening already. So this helps the landlord so they don't have to do it. So, if you can actually support them to be able to improve their building, ultimately they own the building. This will future-proof the building for them as well. But I would take it as this, like try to negotiate it so it's beneficial for you as well.
Yeah, and just on that, we've been doing some research on our side because we understand that many within the fan network don't own their buildings. So what changes that can be made? There are a lot of changes that can be made, but you don't own your building in terms of energy efficiency. Obviously, when you get to things like solar panels and building upgrades, it gets a little bit more complicated. But there is definitely, as you say, Marcella, an angle of there are already building maintenance and repair plans of things that need the building upgrade. And so I think it's like being aware of those, having that conversation with your landlord about how you can build in some of these retrofit measures into these plans for the building that exist already is one approach. And we'll be bringing out some guidance and ways to approach this in the next month or so as part of a toolkit that we're bringing out focused exactly on this tricky issue.
Yeah, and I think as you were saying, Zoe, if there are plans for the roof to be replaced in a building or repaired, great opportunity to be considering solar panels because scaffolding costs a lot of money, adds a lot of costs to a project. So, making sure that those roofs are already kind of structurally safe. So I think it's important to have these conversations because, again, it will support them, especially if you were looking at, and just have clarity, I think, of making sure your lease reflects that if you were to put solar panels, is it yours or is it the buildings and the landlords? So you can kind of negotiate because we have had this issue sometimes where there wasn't much clarity. So try to safeguard your work, I think, as an organization. But there is, I think, at least in Hackney, a lot of these community spaces are being lost because it's just very expensive to maintain them. And who is going to be responsible for funding and making sure that they are better? So I think if you can, be proactive to try and improve the buildings, the landlords will generally support you, unless they are some of the news kind of type of landlords that just want to make as much money as possible.
Okay, got some more questions coming in. This one's for you, Katie. Do we have to provide a lot of numbers for an application to the National Street Fund? We've been using the Julie's Bicycle Creative Climate tool to help back up our case with data, but we only have partial information because we are volunteer-led, have no dedicated environmental lead, and we don't have access to all our data.
Numbers as in numbers for like evidence numbers kind of thing, and like impact, or
I think in this case it will be talking about like carbon emissions and like carbon reductions, like what level of
we require no numbers.
Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah. So I mean, this is Awards for All is probably going to be the most straightforward funding application out there. Yeah, it's a very light touch, very stripped back in terms of the information that you have to apply. It's just for like more nuanced projects like these ones are likely to be. It's just really getting the framing right. So kind of like we said with some of the kind of maybe more specialist equipment or that kind of thing, like this is key to our work to allow us to continue to engage with the community, and this is the ways that we're already doing that, this is the way that people are on board with that, this is why that's important. So I would say as long as you're kind of if you're filling out an application and you're like focused on, right, I'm applying to the community fund, how can I make it really clear that there's community benefit and involvement here, then yeah, there are ways to frame it well. But yeah, we don't require any technical detail.
Thank you for that. Okay, some more questions in the Q&A. Claire says, Marcella referred to the importance of understanding energy use in the first place. The Screensavers webinar linked at the end of this page gives a lot of practical tips on how to understand your energy use and the types of energy efficiency and renewable energy measures to consider. So we'll share that link in the chat. Joe asks, I'm interested if anyone has come across a project which reduces the volume of the auditorium by installing retractable ceiling across the base of the fly tower over the stage during the cinema operation. The Cube Cinema in Bristol has been looking at this as both internal and external installation are problematic due to flying rig and other kit internally and the aesthetics externally. The main heat loss is vertically through the main heat loss is vertically through the fly tower in winter. I'm seeing some nodding. I will pass this over.
Were you nodding, Katie, as well? Okay. Yeah, no, it's just reminding me, I think I was in a conversation, it was a church building actually, where they were talking to things about this similarly. And I think just one thing to consider is the multiple uses of the building. They were looking at using cork because it's beautiful and it's very light, so it doesn't actually put strains on your building, and so it's kind of very easy to install. But then the sound, it would be good for one activity there where it would kind of make the sound a little bit better. But then they came to the conclusion that it would not support other activities. So I think if you're thinking about this, think of movable systems if there is multiple uses on the building, because you want to be able to not forbid other activities from happening there, because if you install these things that are static, you might have trouble later. But there is a lot of new technology out there, prices are changing, and I would imagine in a place like Bristol there'll be there is very good community energy groups actually in Bristol that could help you look at that.
Thanks, Marcella. I think, this is one of the tricky things with community cinemas. They're not just like classic community spaces. There's very specific technical necessities in order to keep doing what cinemas do best. So it does make it a little bit trickier. But then, yeah, maybe there's a story to tell there.
But I think it's this, Kate, Zoe, because I think when Hackney Empire installed the solar panels and they did a lot of promotion about the lighting of the stages and stuff, this raised their profile a lot, and it helped them a lot actually in their journey to fundraise and to build trust and to kind of build influence in the industry. And people start contacting them because they saw these stories and they wanted to help. So I think, yeah, is an opportunity once one organization kind of develop these positive relationships and knowledge to actually share within the industry and the other organizations that can actually tap into the same knowledge.
Yeah, I guess we haven't got any more questions. So if you've got any final questions, now's the time. Chuck them in the Q&A function or in the chat and we'll get to them. I guess a question from me is, we talked a lot about we have to tell this story about community engagement first. Obviously, Katie, the application for National Lottery is not very long. Like, is there any kind of standout ways that people tell the story really effectively about community engagement in such a short application? Like, or is it really varied? I'm looking at your face.
It is super varied, and it's super like on a case-by-case basis because every project is different. So yeah, it really is about how you're never going to be able to tell us about everything that you do or like everything in super technical detail. I'll say maybe where things have fallen down a little bit on the environment side is that they're really desperate to get all of that like environmental knowledge, expertise, that side of stuff in, that they then maybe forfeit a little bit more on the like, this is why it's important for us, and this is why if we don't have this, we're not going to be sustainable into the future. We're not going to be able to continue to whatever it is. What we have done a lot more of on this program than what we have tended to be able to do on standard awards for all is ask questions, is to do follow-up stuff with our grant holders or applicants. So, if we're not sure or if we feel like there's maybe some clarifications that could be made, we will get in touch with the contact. So and we've got an advice line, so you're always welcome to either kind of call and talk to somebody on there, or if you wanted to call and kind of specifically asked for like a message to come get through to our team, you could do that as well for a bit more direct contact. So yeah, sorry, no great top tips at this stage.
I think that is a top tip though. I think especially those engaged with the environmental side, you can get very wrapped up in the technicality because you put a lot of work into understanding, especially your building and and so sometimes having to leave that a little bit at the door and just focus a little bit more on narrative is a useful piece of information when it comes because in lots of other funds for climate, you have to center that. So these kind of funding applications, it leave that a little bit at the door. Marcella, any advice from you?
Yeah, not quite, but actually I have a couple of questions for Katie. Katie, you mentioned that an organization that has benefited from the National Lottery Awards for all before can't apply again. Is this forever, or is it in the last 2 years?
No,
If
so
we ever.
yes. So our rules are you can receive up to £20,000 of funding within a 12-month period. So
12 months. Okay.
yeah, so if you've already had it at some point in the last 12 months, then you kind of need to wait for the point that it will refresh.
Okay, but they could potentially do
Yeah,
another
we
project
have
next
groups
year.
that will fund every 12 months, essentially.
Okay. So, could a project be looking at investigation? So I talked a little bit about, doing energy audits and investigation. So funding for that kind of stream of work is more limited than for capital works generally in energy projects. Could they tailor a project in a way that did describe how this building is going to, I think there is a lot of community benefit, and the building will probably be more comfortable. It will make it more sustainable because you save money. You can invest that money in your community. Could they apply for funding for some kind of energy study or feasibility study if they could demonstrate and engage their community in that? Or does it have to be hard stuff that you can see?
Yeah, so I'd say traditionally the hard stuff that you can see has been an easier thing to fund. We have found through the environment strand specifically, that's kind of been like a little bit more of a straightforward route in for groups to that kind of in that feasibility space. So it's not always a hard no. I think, again, thinking about like tangible benefit and impact for people who are going to be involved. So I'm thinking about one which is like in a completely different sector, but they wanted to engage people from like a particularly disadvantaged socioeconomic background in community consultation about what was going to happen to a waterworks area. It was a London project, actually, a waterworks that they wanted to kind of turn into a nature reserve type thing. And the only reason that application didn't go on to be funded was because they wanted to give cash. The majority of the budget was for cash for participation for individuals, and we can't fund cash to individuals. However, kind of the nub of the idea about getting people who are most impacted by climate change, who are most disenfranchised by these kinds of conversations, involved in consultation about how to use a community asset, that was okay. That part was fundable. So I feel like I'm going to keep saying the same thing over and over again. It really is going to be about framing and about how strongly an application can demonstrate that, like, hey, look, there are a group of people who really should be involved here, and who there are all these barriers to engagement, and we want to do something to break down those barriers to engagement that is going to lead to good, like, kind of good outcomes for the environment in XYZ ways. That could work.
Thank you.
I love when speakers start asking questions of each other, because then they ask the really good questions. So thank you. Marcella also said you can reach out to Bristol City Leap and Centre for Sustainable Energy, both in Bristol, and might be keen to work with you as it develops their knowledge too. And I think that speaks to most cities across the UK. There are very active networks working at this kind of nexus of community energy, renewable energy, community-owned renewable energy. It's a really interesting and exciting space. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely, I mean, you guys probably already have, but give it a Google in the city that you're based in. We've had a couple of interesting, not questions, just comments from an anonymous attendee in the Q&A. So Cinema Rio in Brussels recycles the heat from their bar by a heat exchange unit to warm fresh incoming air and heat their auditorium, which is super interesting. And some churches have made heat pads on the seats to heat people rather than try and heat the entire space if there are only a few users for a short time. And Bath Abbey uses natural heat from the thermal spa as underfloor heating to heat the building. So yeah, some interesting food for thought there in terms of heating our buildings. It's kind of interesting. Could we heat individual cinema seats if it was just a low attended session? I don't know. Others can do the research.
When you're applying for funding, I think innovative projects are always well looked at from a perspective of I don't know the National Lottery, but other funding for energy. Because, you know, a lot of people are doing solar panels, but if you can do something that is different, that can demonstrate something different, I think you'll be looked at nicely. And in terms of heating buildings, I think a lot of the work that we do, we're saying that panels that heat the person, then heating the room is kind of going to be more and more popular because insulation is very expensive. So actually, if you can heat the person and you don't have to run the heating of the space so much, it will enable a lot more projects to happen. So I could imagine this being very, very popular in the cinema kind of industry.
Yeah, and I think that just to go back to what we were saying before, like you don't have to be the expert to come up with this yourself. Again, by connecting to local groups who are already working on this, understand, you know, the local area, the local resources, and plugging into that local district heating systems, for example. This work is already being done. You as a cinema don't have to come up with it, but it's understanding your role in, like, there's an amazing role in community engagement that cinemas can play. You have space. You have knowledge on cultural programming. All of these things are often what these other kinds of groups lack. And so I think that it's about building that relationship that can be really, really helpful in applying for these kinds of funds. Broadway in Nottingham does the same as the cinema in Brussels that was just mentioned. If everybody's questions have been answered, I am going to thank our speakers so much for being super helpful, for these super detailed questions. It's super helpful. Just checking there's no more questions. Okay, no, we're good. All right. And I just want to wish everybody who's been on the call good luck with any kind of applications that you're putting together. These are not the only two funds you can apply to, but I think it's really helpful in terms of framing this specific area of the nexus of renewable energy, retrofit, community engagement that are funds that are available to community cinemas in the FAN network. There is a resource on Julie's Bicycle. It's a list of funding resources for environmental initiatives that exhibition and screen heritage sector organisations across the UK can apply for. You can find that on sustainablescreen.juliesbicycle.com/funding. It's been updated this summer, and there's also a glossary for sustainability funding on the BFI FAN website. So you can check both of those resources out. Coming soon, again, I mentioned this earlier, we have a toolkit we're working on, which is on kind of DIY bottom-up retrofit measures. So these aren't the kind of grand capital works that require tons of capacity and resource, but things that you can do here and now, even if you rent your building, to make some of those key changes and start building that basis for larger funds, but also some of the stuff that you can apply to evidence that you're working on it, and also to bring down day-to-day energy costs. So that will be coming soon. So yeah, check out all of those resources out. Thanks for attending. Thanks for asking really insightful and useful questions. And once again, thank you to our speakers for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. And on that note, I will close the webinar. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely weekend. See you all at the next Green Hour.